Forward. This is the first volume of my diaries and covers the period from 1999 to 2001. I have slightly edited several entries for publication, and I have at times attempted to correct some but not all of my grammatical errors. When writing these various entries, I allowed myself not to worry too much about proper punctuation and syntax. I have a fairly bad habit of using ellipses, somewhat frequently, to indicate or suggest a deleted thought, a dramatic pause, or an undeveloped idea or thought. I also have a tendency to use surf jargon, which I assume, perhaps incorrectly, can be decipherable to the general reader without further elaboration. I would like to state straight up that this edited version of my online diary isn't complete or exhaustive. So many personal things have been left out, particularly the most important events which transpired during this period, namely the birth of my first son, Sean Michael. At the time, I had already created a different website solely devoted to him and his upbringing. On that site, which I kept private and only shared with family and friends, I had nearly 100 mini-films documenting his first year. It was only much later, when blogging became so widely accepted worldwide, that I began to incorporate more intimate details of my life into my public diary. Volume 3 of my diaries, for instance, is filled with references about my wife Andrea and our 2 sons. Ironically, when I first started publishing my diary online in 1999, I got some heated critiques from some who felt that I should wait until I was long dead for my personal reflections to be aired. It seems to have escaped their notice that what I was presenting on the World Wide Web was itself a much censored version of my life. I wish I could admit to being as frank and as disarming as Errol Flynn was in his wonderful memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, but alas, I don't have such courage. Whereas Flynn was willing to show many sides of his octagonal character, to crib one of his more insightful metaphors, I have tended to show merely 2 or 3 window panes into my soul. As for the other parts, I have consciously left them opaque. I don't think writing as such is an honest adventure. I think rather it is a way to create, or, in this instance recreate, a narrative that can somehow make sense out of the twists and turns of one's often random course through life. Diaries are, perhaps, a quasi-Freudian exercise of self-inflicted psychoanalysis, or, even worse, it is a way to exorcise unresolved conflicts and tensions from one's psyche by projecting them onto a faceless and nameless reader out in the blogosphere. If so, I must apologize to my various readers for not also paying them a requisite fee for having to endure such cruel machinations. I realize that some of what I write here will offend certain friends and colleagues. Indeed, some of what I've written actually offends my own sensibilities, but I've tried to minimize such offenses by either deleting whole sections out from my more comprehensive musings, or by focusing more pointedly on the real culprit behind the drama, which is invariably myself. Being raised Catholic and being quite religiously inclined since an early age, it has been no easy task to assuage myself from the guilt that often accompanies my critical sojourns. But as I age, I am more and more convinced that a healthy skepticism and a keenly critical mind are far superior to any false pretensions at piety or humility. In other words, I think that if there is a God, or a truth, or a reality, it will quite easily survive the doubtful ruminations and questions of a waterlogged college teacher. Of course, it could well be that such queries and such moments of soul-searching are mere signposts of how a human mind matures over time, and says precious little about anything truly ontological. On that score, I am in full agreement with that wise old cardinal of the Catholic Church, Nicholas of Cusa, who stated centuries ago a truth that I think will remain true centuries in the future. The unattainable is attained by its unattainment. Perhaps delving deeply into our own thoughts will ground us once again into the wonderful mystery of unknowingness. I know for myself that what I thought was true and certain at age 4 changed when I was 14, and changed again when I was 40. With all this uncertainty, however, I have become fairly certain, even conceited to some measure, about one quite remarkable thing. What is that? That no matter how much I read or think or search, I will always come up short. I will always come up dumbfounded. What is so perverse about this, of course, is that I have come to find this recurring ignorance on my part to be a great source of bliss. November 29th, 2007, Huntington Harbor. 1999. September 25th, 1999. Surf is 2 to 3, southwest ground swell. I kept a diary many years ago when I was 18 or so. However, I discarded it when I realized that I couldn't write down all of my musings unedited. In this new incarnation, I've decided to simply comment on those things which are available for public consumption and won't get me in any deep personal trouble. Of course, that's probably the biggest drawback to this project, since it will lack the in-house gossip that always makes personal confessions, think of Augustine for instance, both intriguing and banal. The surf is up today, but Seal Beach's water is suspect. I find myself surfing at the North Jetty near sunset. Weird wave, actually. It reminds me of Waikiki, mushy, good shape, and wimpy. Yet 3 days ago I had unquestionably one of the most memorable days of my life. It was 3 foot solid, maybe a 4 foot set, and the water was sheer glass, and remarkably warm. I estimate it had to be in the mid-70s. The lefts were literally perfect and peeled all the way to the northernmost jetty. I must have caught 30+ waves. Several of them were visionary, kept a high line on my 9'2" Iron Cross longboard, and could feel the simple geometry of the bowl. Surfed 2 straight hours, but I was in a full wetsuit. What an idiot. But I wore it thinking that the wind would come up. It never did. And not realizing how warm the San Gabriel River is due to the adjacent electrical plant, pouring its continual hot pee into the soup. Why am I so attracted to Nietzsche? I first started seriously reading him in 1996 during my sabbatical. I had, of course, encountered him before. I vividly remember my old friend Jeff Cooper singing his praises back when we were idealistic teenagers in search of the truth. But I dismissed him at the time, primarily because I had not seriously read him, and probably because I was certain of a particular way, that of interior meditation. Yet, during my sabbatical, I read a fine biography of Nietzsche that I couldn't put down. It gave me an insight into his personal sufferings and struggles. Then I began to read everything, and I do mean everything, Nietzsche had written. I tried my best to read various commentaries on him, but most of them were horrific. Nietzsche is one philosopher that must be read directly. Anything secondary merely dilutes him, and usually the commentator doesn't have a clue what Nietzsche is getting at. Nietzsche's Antichrist is the single best rip of Christianity that I know of, and there is no dearth of good rips. Yet, what I find most attractive about Nietzsche is his critique of morality, embodied naturally in his pithy phrase, the transvaluation of values. I must say it turned my entire thinking about morality on its head. I realized that most of what passes for morality is merely a social game whereby we broker status chips to one another in the hope of making ourselves or others feel better. It is, as Nietzsche so rightly points out, a social construction, a power ploy, usually employed by those who wish some kind of control over others. I used to be a fairly self-righteous vegetarian, not strident, but in my own head I felt a one-upmanship in the moral arena. But on closer inspection, and in light of Nietzsche and in light of veganism, which is pushing the envelope so far that even us 70s vegetarians feel like carnivores, I came to realize that such feelings of superiority are merely symptoms of my own projections of trying to feel better about my own place in the moral cosmos. Man is not a vegetarian. He is an omnivore, and the choices we make are often based on tradition, on whimsy, on selective reasoning, on comfort. But is the meat eater really morally inferior? No. I also got turned on last year to the amazing fiction of Jorge Borges. It was quite stunning for me since I almost never read fiction. Yet Borges's writing is never fictional. Horgan and Dennett are right about him. He is a first-rate philosopher. I got a book on tape which contained selections from the recent collection Ficciones. The reader was so good and so frickin' fun, I almost peed in my pants. I hope he does the new volume that has just come out, Selected Non-Fictions. It should be a riot. Borges is one of the best writers I've ever encountered, and I'm reading him in translation.